Good evening and welcome to this special evening edition of 42 Minutes, a weekly show where we have a conversation about the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. This week, September 18th, our 49th podcast, we're speaking with Neil Kramer, writer, philosopher, and teacher. Neil is the author of several books, including a contribution to last year's Think book, but today we're interested in his most recent effort, The Unfoldment, a book published this past spring by New Page Books. It offers the encouragement that if you can do Earth as a human being, you can do anything. Welcome, Neil.
Hello, good to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Well, thanks for coming back. I want to begin by stating how readable your prose and this book is. It's really been, there's an effortlessness to reading this, and it's a joy. So
thank you.
You're a great writer, and if this was just to talk about writing, it would be so much more easier. But the actual book itself, I have to say, kind of churned up a lot of energetic movement for me. Did this? I mean, as you were writing it, did you encounter the same thing, or were you kind of separated from? You were reporting something you'd already done, or was this something that was happening as you were doing it?
When you say energetic movement, what do you mean?
So it's almost like the book facilitates the thing that you're reading about. And I'm sure that's intentional, but it's a little unnerving because...
Okay, I get you. Well, that's why it has such a pleasant cover, you see, which is to lure you in and make you feel safe. And like it's a happy, colourful, soft book. And then when you get in the middle of it, and then kick you in the testicles, right?
Well, there's some darkness in there, and this is what's so great is that it's a spiritual path book. But I mean, you take your hand and pull them right into the darkness of conspiracy and various reality tunnels.
Well, what I envisage is probably three books that have a relationship to one another. And in a sense, this book is my attempt to speak to anybody who is vaguely interested in real questions of existence and philosophy and spirit and metaphysics and the whole shebang, everything, synchromysticism, whatever, the whole lot. Anyone who's seriously interested in that can read this book and go away and think this is a worthwhile endeavor, this philosophical approach to one's own life. It's something that is important, and it's something that has a lot of creativity and a lot of substance to it. And I think despite the fact that we can go into Barnes and Noble and see so many books about similar subjects, there really are not many that one would recommend to one's friends. Not for me anyway. There's a handful, and a lot of them are old books and they're difficult to read and stuff. So I just thought, well, okay, if I'm going to talk to like my dad or my cousin or the guy down the end of the street and treat him respectfully and seriously, even though they may not know about this stuff, how do I communicate with that person? So this is my experimental kind of conversation with the uninitiated, if you like, to say, okay, I'm going to treat you like a grown-up and I'm going to talk in the most sincere way I can. And at the same time, all the people who are already on the path, if we might put it like that, I'm going to also treat them seriously and try and give them something of substance as well. And there are a lot of things encoded into that book that do facilitate a movement of energy, a very natural one, a very organic one, and only in the same way that an artist would encode, his own intent and desires and dreams and uplifting energies into his painting or a piece of music or whatever, just in the same way. But with words, you've got to be a little bit more artful because it's such a literal translation. You're really not leaving much to the imagination of the reader. So I've tried to do what I can to deal with both those two things on the same page. To say, okay, newcomers, welcome. This is what I feel is going on here. And old hands or intermediate students also welcome. And this is where I'm up to. And you might be able to, get a bit deeper. So Yeah, it is. It is a different experiment, if you like. I think the next book will be something different again. But this is like, if I'm going to seriously talk to people, this is the tone in which I would like to do it, and this is the meaning that I'd like to put behind every word, every sentence, every paragraph. So it's very heartfelt, and that readability is also part of that strategy, if you like, to say, I'm going to make this kind of enjoyable to read. This isn't going to stick in your throat. This isn't going to like be, something that you're going to have to consider as a reference work or a textbook. You can read this pretty quickly, really, and then maybe you might need to go back and look at bits of it again. But that's the idea. So yeah, I appreciate the compliment, by the way. Thank you.
So would you say that this book is, or perhaps all of the choices I'm about to give you, is this a philosophical book, a spiritual book, or a magical book?
I would like to think that it's all of those things. It's definitely philosophical. That is really what it's about. The wisdom we find around us and how we can apply it. The stuff we come up with ourselves, the wisdom we find in other people's words and ideas and lives, and how we can creatively overlay that onto our own stuff. Spirituality, I think it's difficult to be philosophical and not approach spirit unless you're a very hard, cold clockwork existentialist philosopher. And really, that kind of intellectualism has no place in my book or my life. So those people aside, I think anybody who thinks about existence and their place in the world and their relationship to the universe, you come to questions of spirit and of this ephemeral connection between oneself and the infinite and greater, more powerful beings than human consciousness, and where they are and what the hierarchy is and how does that function. That's inevitable. That's going to happen. And the magical element of it, again, is something quite ordinary in my life, which is stuff that occurs that definitely magic is the word you would ascribe to it, that we don't have any particular explanation for. Things that anybody who has gone through the Sync book, for example, will understand the dynamics and principles of that. And in a sense, you're really just saying, well, you're removing the idea of separation. And once you do that, everything is magical. And at the same time, nothing is magical. It's all obvious. It's all just bits in the same membrane wobbling around and, harmonically affecting each other. But for the normal person who has been saturated in mainstream consciousness, magic is a very alluring thing, and rightfully so. So yeah, that's kind of sprinkled throughout the book, really. Again, in a sort of sincere manner, to say we're not just talking about phenomenology for phenomenology's sake. We're talking about the real magic of the path, why this stuff is worth doing, and why it's worth putting our time and effort into it.
So part of your thought is that the universe is kind of set up in various vibrations, and that these different levels of density are folded into one another, and that this path, this unfolding, occurs as you unfold into a different density state.
Yeah.
And one of the thoughts that occurs to me is how oftentimes we can touch some of these density. So the more dense something is, the more concrete it is. But so I think of schizophrenics touching things that they don't have the tools to deal with.
It's so funny you say that. I spoke about that with this bloke on the radio just a few days ago, and he's been speaking about it many times, and it's a recurring meme or sync or whatever you want to call it at the moment. Madness and schizophrenia and dementia and Alzheimer's and all different kinds of things has become a very, very contemporary focus, I think, for metaphysical thinkers. And yeah, you're right. In Portland and Seattle, there seems to be an unaccountably large number of bonkers people wandering about in the streets.
That's just
More
the
so
West
than
Coast, man. That's just the West Coast.
is that right? Maybe I'm too new to get that. But I've been to New York, and you don't see it so much there. I've been to California, not so much, but here there's also a large homeless population. Again, much more so than I've seen anywhere else, really. And progressive sort of left-wing politics or whatever are very tolerant of that. So if you haven't got any money and you want reasonably decent weather, maybe they come here. But you see a lot of people wandering about, talking to themselves, and it's always fascinating that, because sometimes it's just drivel, and they're talking about, beer and cigarettes and music and goodness knows what, and fine, that's okay. But at other times, I've kind of like changed my pace. Say I'm walking behind some guy, to purposefully listen to more of his internal dialogue, which is essentially just leaking out of his mouth. So it's a lot of the stuff that people think ordinarily, I would say, but it's as if they've got the speaker turned on by accident, isn't it? The mouth, and this stuff's coming out of his mouth. His stream of consciousness. This guy, I was walking past the other day, and instead of just swiftly walking past him in 5 seconds, I lingered and listened to a good 45-minute long, 45 seconds or a minute of stuff. And it was fascinating, and it was his observations about what is around him and social decay and degeneration in morals and ethics. And it was, I just thought, you're a really intelligent, insightful, discerning man. And the fact that you've got cigarette burns down your T-shirt and you smell of piss is neither here nor there, really. You know what I mean? That's misleading. But
Right.
what was going on in his brain was fascinating.
Well, it's the whole concept of Lao Tzu, or the Tao, how the Tao flows towards the bottom, no matter what. It seeps into the.
That's so true. Yeah, that's so true. But isn't it funny to see it in such a contemporary landscape? Because we tend to, attribute all that kind of stuff to all kinds of ancient images, but to see it right there, beneath a sort of Samsung 4G poster, and here's a guy saying this stuff, and one is observing it in one's modern life. It's just fascinating.
Well, this brings another question. One of our listeners, whose name is Barry Chills, or he goes by the moniker of Barry Chills, he's a big fan of yours, and he's also from your neck of the woods. In fact, he mentions that in part of your book, you mention a place called Lancashire. Did I say it correctly? It's the first place
Say that again. You just said it.
Lancashire. Lancashire.
Lancashire. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the places you go hunting for books, and he's actually from there, so he thought it was a big sink. But he actually makes the comment. I'll quote him. How young were you when you fully committed to the unfoldment? As sometimes I feel very alone with my peer groups for attaining this book and the others, and maybe it has it's because of the path he's on in his early teens. I'm kind of paraphrasing now. And how do you deal with the conflict of others who don't understand this organic path?
There is no conflict. There isn't any. People do what they do. Some people want to have a fantastic car, and some people want to spend all the time playing pool, and some people want to look at the stars and wonder what's going on. And it's up to the individual what they do with the time that they've been given. That's all you really have to worry about, as our friend Gandalf once said. That's it. That's all you've got to do. Decide what you do with your time. And if you focus purely on your own game and what you're doing, there is no conflict. Now, if you want to share with people and have a discussion like this and talk to other people who get it and talk to people who can amplify and create and augment all the things that we're focusing on, then it gets a bit lonely and weird if you're surrounded by people who don't and can't do that. So it depends how you set up and what sort of people you've got in your social network as to how a lot of those things work and what conflict may or may not arise. So if you're surrounded by dimwits who are not interested in anything except the material substance of the life, it gets old that really, really fast. And the deeper you go, the more crude and irritating that kind of behavior becomes. And it becomes like abominable, really, when you get really deep in your own path. And so you have to offset it with spending time with nature, spending time on your own, but importantly, spending time with people who are doing a similar thing to you and really mean it. And so I would say, I bet that the people who have conflict have an imbalance there and have trouble with that. So when I look to times in my life where there's that kind of conflict, that was the case for me. And when I look around now, at other people who have those problems, it's the same for them. When you've got a harmony and a diversity of contact, that kind of stuff goes away because you're not trying to prove anything, you're not persuading, you're not interested in steering anything. You're just doing your own thing, you're playing your own game, and you're not bothered about what anyone else is doing, and you don't judge as well. So as soon as you remove judgment from the equation, the conflict recedes. So conflict is the universe's way of saying, right, there's something you're missing here. And just so you don't miss it forever, I'm going to create a situation of conflict. So whatever conflict arises, there's always some clue there and something valuable to look at. And it doesn't matter that there's conflict in itself, that inevitably will disappear. But when it comes, it's always like, hang on a second, a little light bulb goes off over your head. Look around in your life because there's something that you're missing.
Well, oh, wow. This kind of makes me think about what you said in the book about beliefs. And that for some reason I equate judgments, like the judgments you have on people, or the beliefs that, not totally recognizing the hints that you get about other people or the little narrative that you make in your head about other people as fact. Do you know what I mean? It's not the separation. I mean, what do you think about that? Is it kind of along the same ideas as almost keeping a very less static belief system?
It is in a way. I mean, we can say we have beliefs or we don't have beliefs. It's difficult to not have any beliefs, and sometimes it's nice to believe in something, but kind of ontologically speaking and metaphysically speaking, it's totally unnecessary to have a belief. And a belief is really just sort of a working model that seems to have some sort of value, and you run with it, even though it cannot necessarily be proven or corroborated. You run with it and you think, well, this model works okay. Like, this woman over here, I think she might like me. I think she might find me attractive. That's a belief. It's a working model that you don't really know if it's true or not until you start to get evidence of that, right? As you go through this process of unfoldment, which is essentially a process of removing any concealment from your life, from yourself, from the universe, from other people, and you get purer and purer and more brutally honest with yourself, your picture of who you are and your picture of who other people are changes, like quite regularly. Like at first, sort of with startling frequency, and you look around and think, I don't know who anybody is anymore. I don't know who the hell I am anymore. You look in the mirror like a movie and you sort of think, who am I? What am I doing? That's a sign in a way that you're moving out of this phase of concealment, because when we're in concealment, we have to uphold an image of ourselves, like, hey, yeah, I'm this, I listen to this, I watch this, I wear this, whatever. And you have this narrative that you build that defines yourself. In spiritual warriorhood, that has to go straight away. That has to be smashed to pieces. And largely, a lot of sitting on the floor or throwing yourself out into the mountainside or getting in the caves and burying yourself and all that is kind of like spiritual boot camp, just to knock the shit out of you and get you back to a clear space to say, look, don't worry about images of yourself and other people. That's got to go, that has. And so in our ancestral shamanic traditions and spiritual traditions, we have many precedents for that. But in modern society, you're positively encouraged to uphold an image of yourself and make it a strong, powerful, fascinating, sexy, kinky, amazing one, right? And the more obtuse and funny and bizarre it is, the better in a way. So you're encouraged to have this very rich, intricate tapestry of your own self-image. And that is the opposite of what has to happen in a way. So this whole thing of personal narratives and judgment and belief, and that has to be just totally uninstalled as an application. It's totally unnecessary, and it gets in the way of things.
You make the point that beliefs are psychological and not necessarily philosophical, but you do emphasize truth. Could you speak about truth a little bit?
Yeah. If you examine truth in your own life, the first thing you come to is that it's relative. And you realize that, well, what's true for me isn't necessarily true for someone else. I like this red sofa, but my friend doesn't like this red sofa. Or I believe in God and they don't believe in God. Or I think it's okay to have, these people fighting a war in this country, and someone else thinks it's just terrible. It's the most hideous thing that could ever happen. And you say, well, where's the truth in this stuff, right? And when you discover more about truth and you look at it philosophically and see what other people have said about it, particularly the Germans and the French and the British and the Americans in philosophical works, classical, proper, valuable philosophical works, you start to see that it's a very thorny issue, and it's not as straightforward as saying, well, it's just relative, because that absolutely demolishes the value of truth if it's all subjective and all relative. It's not quite like that. And so then you come to the fact that there is some empirical truth, there is some absolute truth, but your perception of that, your ability to see that, is kind of filtered and affected and influenced by how clear you can see. So if you can't see very clearly and you're wrapped up in your own affairs, and all you're bothered about is, your new running shoes and the size of the wristwatch and all the bling or whatever, which again is a TV influenced thing for a lot of young men and women in the teens and 20s. If that's what you're doing, your perception of truth is limited by that level of consciousness. As you mature, you can make more and more decisions with more and more clarity. Then your truth extends and you can see more truth. And you're not just thinking about yourself anymore, but you're thinking about, well, how do my actions affect other people? How do my words affect my mother? How do my words affect my colleagues at work? How does my driving affect other people on the road? And you think more broadly about the effect of your consciousness in the world. Then when you go to the next level, the spiritual level, the path as we call it sometimes, you think even more profoundly about it. And you realize that actually there's only one truth, and we're all looking at the same thing from different angles with different kind of filters over our eyes. And there's just one thing. There's just one resplendent divine truth that just absolutely is built into everything. And it's not relative at all. The only thing that's relative about it is the fact that you can only see the level of it that equates to your own spiritual attainment. So if you're selfish and self-centered and it's service to self, your life, which many people live that way, even smart, intelligent, moral people still really secretly live that way, then you can't see truth. You surrogate, you swap it out with something else. But if you start living selflessly and your service is to the universe and the whole, then you are permitted to see greater degrees of truth in the world and in life and in death and in the surrounding realms and the other densities and so on. More of the world is revealed to you because you've been proving by the way you live, not just what you say or what you write on a page, but the actual way you live. You've been proving that you're fit to see more. And so the universe reveals more of itself to you. And we call that truth.
There's something to this, though. I mean, a lot of individuals who experience this a sudden advance in like spiritual knowledge or whatever you wish to label it as, but they experienced this, and then as all of their previous beliefs and goals and things that they thought were important dissolve, they 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 get the inclination that nothing is important. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about? And
Yeah.
how does one deal with that? I mean, this like, oh well, if that's not important, then what does matter?
That's so funny. That's so funny, and that is a. I do most of my time at the moment is spent with other people who essentially um, engage me to help with their path for guidance and inspiration and knowledge and so on. And that's I spend a lot of time in that teaching capacity, if you like. And that very thing that you've just said is a very common thing that comes up, which is that when you do get to a certain threshold of awareness and knowledge about yourself and the world, you sort of just stand there with your hands on your hips for a minute and think, well, what's the bloody point in anything then? Why do anything? Why get up? Why not just play on the Xbox all day until I just drop over dead? Because it doesn't really matter. And that's true. That is actually true. It doesn't matter. You could do that if you want. It might not be very good though, particularly if you've got a wife and kids waiting to have dinner and you're just not doing anything. It doesn't
You'll
look
you'll
very good.
you'll be freaking awesome at Call of Duty though, for sure.
You'd be absolutely the best sort of sniper in the universe, wouldn't you? No, I get what you're saying. It's a very weird thing. I think humor is important, even as we're laughing about this and making jokes and stuff. I think that's relevant because it is a funny thing to realize that nothing matters, right? And at a very, very high level, that's a true thing. That is a true thing. Nothing matters is true. However, the way we do things has an effect on the unfoldment of the universe itself. The secret of unfoldment is that when you're doing it properly, you align and calibrate yourself with the universe's unfoldment, and that's when the sort of magic starts to happen. And the universe whispers into your ear. It says to you, you know what? We don't need to do this, and there's no imperative to do things in a particular manner, and there's not even any good and evil as such. However, the drive for elegance and beauty and refinement and purity tells us things about the creation itself. So every time we refine the creation, we understand more about it. And in sort of emanationist philosophy from Plotinus onwards, 2,000 years ago, we learn that one of the ways to map the universe is to help in its refinement and creation. And that's what's worthwhile. So right up front in the book, I kind of give clues to this and say, treat your life as an art project. Treat your whole life as an art project, in that it doesn't really matter. There's no right and wrong answers. You don't even have to do it. You can do anything you want. And yet, there's a beauty in making the best art that you're capable of and making it as unique and as stunning and as meaningful as possible. And that is the sort of dilemma, and yet the beauty of the artist, isn't it? Because there's no right and wrong. It's not like bloody mathematics where there's really only one answer. If you face a certain student with a blank canvas and say, hey, just do whatever you want, they'll go, oh, whoopee, that's brilliant, I can't wait. Another sort of person will think, oh my God, what, nature, robotics, what you're talking about? I've no idea. Give me parameters. I need parameters. So one of the lessons in spirituality is those parameters get removed and you have to self-determine. And that's part of learning what meaning is, in that to some extent you articulate the meaning for yourself. And for some people that's very uncomfortable because they prefer someone else to do it for them. But when you start doing it, the payoff is the universe starts to see what you're doing and assist with that, and you move into new realms with higher and deeper meaning, and there's more meaning than you can ever handle. So no one needs to worry about that.
That's when the path leaves the map and it gets scary.
The path leads the map. Yeah, I like that.
So you invoked philosophy at the beginning. I'm just curious about the unfoldment speaks to more of a spiritual side, but how does this play with Jung's actualization? I mean, they're similar.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who are going to read this book have got certain things. They've got a few dollars in the pocket. They can read and write. They're thinking about the world and themselves, and we're imagining a certain level of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs that have been met. So they've got food and shelter and so on and this and that and the other. And I'm really talking to a lot of people who have had those things or can get them if they want them, and yet they're not really happy. And even today, where I do see a lot of young people with incredibly high levels of emotional intelligence compared to the morons of the 1960s and 70s young people who didn't know anything about themselves or other people. Smart young people today are very smart and very plugged in and understand a lot of stuff. Forget technology and Facebook and Twitter and all that nonsense. I mean, as organic human beings, they know stuff. There's been some sort of mental program upgrade. And philosophy is really, to adults, is something you have to give yourself permission to engage in, because it's been the sort of private hobby, hasn't it, of academics in tweed suits with cigar ash down the front. That's got to go. That philosophy is a very natural human impulse. Everybody loves philosophy. When you sit around a campfire at night, that's what people are doing. They're philosophizing. They're telling stories. But as soon as those stories, as you might have noticed, they evolve and they morph into big questions about the universe and about life and death and love and loss and all those amazing things that we all get involved in. That is the natural human philosophical impulse, a love of wisdom and a love of the mystery of life. And so I'm trying to give people who might not have the confidence that I have to say, this is okay, you know. You don't have to have loads of degrees and stuff. You don't even have to read loads of books if you don't want to. That's not essential. It would be if you were at university, but real living philosophy, that's not important. The thing is to make your own mind up about things, to self-determine and be your own authority, and not give in to the pressure not to think. Thinking is a very delightful thing to do in this world.
One of the things that you mentioned in terms of philosophy is that you like to pick up ideas. You don't necessarily need to believe in them, but you can pick them up for a while and see how you like them and then put them down and pick up something else.
Yeah, that's right. It's again not something that anyone ever tells us, that when somebody suggests a way of looking at the world, whether you were thinking about Israel and Palestine or Manchester United and Liverpool football clubs, or Asian chicks or black chicks, but nobody says, look, you don't have to go down one particular path. There's no real solid framework for this. You can actually just run with an idea and see how it feels. You don't have to make your mind up on a long-term basis on it. So if somebody says there are other life forms much cleverer than us on other planets in our solar system, that is a very controversial, provocative thing to say to somebody. And the impulse that we've been taught to amplify is, I don't believe it. Nonsense, bullshit. That's, how can you say, where's your evidence? What does that mean? You can't just say people need closure very quickly on a given idea. So the idea of having no beliefs is really a sort of backdoor way of saying to people, look, don't seek closure on an idea. Let the idea sit, right, unconcluded, and let it evolve over a period of time. So you're leaving a lot of like little kind of nuggets, I call them like feathers or whatever. You can hold a lot of these feathers in your little shaman's pouch over your shoulder, and there's no weight to them as such. There's no particular gravity associated with them. They're not difficult to carry. And one of those feathers, you might be carrying it for 30, 50, 70 years and think, that is excellent. That has just been a good idea, a nice way of looking at the world, a good reality model. I'm keeping hold of that. Another one, you think, well, that's just nonsense. That doesn't work. It doesn't feel right. And you just discard it and say, well, thanks, but bye, And you find that when you do that, that you don't really need to internalize any of that ever. You don't need to have beliefs. You don't need to maintain the consciousness to have these strong beliefs and principles and ethics and morals about things. It's totally, totally unnecessary. You don't need to live like that. And in fact, when you do, you squander your consciousness on maintaining those beliefs because they take juice to run them.
It's detrimental in all actuality, is what you're saying. I like the way that you give the analogy of weight, like beliefs have weight, and they just pull us down. But nonetheless, I would love to meet a black Israeli chick from Liverpool.
Yeah, well, I'll give you some phone numbers after the program.
That's ridiculous. Good God.
Something that has been coming up for Will and I is the idea of alien contact stories. We did a show with a guy who did a lot of research into that, and one of the interesting things is your unfoldment actually kind of explains that these higher vibratory beings are contacting people to engage them and initiate them into their own unfolding process.
This also brings up the whole, synchronicity in a way can be considered as an other, just like aliens or whatever. Almost like a message from the field. I would also like to ask you if you think that the field, the definition you gave as the field, is intelligent in a way.
Yeah, I think it is, and I think this comes back to biblical words like the word and the logos or the logos. That there is this.
Language seems to be a binding factor.
Yeah, there is this medium through which we use to reflect and represent ideas, and we have these symbols that we use to describe and articulate things. But the actual medium itself has intelligence, and the field of knowledge is a living field, and it has its own intellect. It has its own divinity in a way, in that you can equate divinity with intelligence, and certainly from a Gnostic point of view, they're very closely associated. And even in regular Christian scripture, you can pull out passages from some of the Gospels that will say, you can, if you like. So they put the two very closely together, and I've been kind of running with that as a reality model and seeing how I feel about that, rather than how I think about it, because it's difficult to think about it. But feeling it is quite instructive, and it feels right to me. That I don't really understand quite how and why just yet. Maybe I'll explore that in the next book more fully. But for the moment, feeling the intelligence of things in it, not just in a pantheistic way where everything has its own little life and divinity and spirit, but the fact that really they're all sort of forms temporarily popping out of this intelligent field just makes an awful lot of sense. And then when you come to a very articulated form, a very apparently independent or even sovereign form, we call that an extraterrestrial or an ultra-terrestrial, and say, well, it's not from our realm, but it's intelligent and it's from somewhere else. So we give it this word, but as soon as you say that, it's inevitably associated with like a little grey guy in a freaking flying saucer, And it's not at all like that. It's funny you talk about this subject. I'm going to be on Whitley Strieber program next month, actually. So,
dude, Strieber has been coming up so much for me. It's ridiculous.
Strieber, is that how you pronounce it? I must get that right before.
Whitley Strieber, yes, Mr.
Whitley Strieber. Well, his Dreamland show.
Correct.
For whatever reason, he personally sent me an email and said, "Hey, like what you're doing, come on the show." And I said, "Yeah, all right." So we're going to talk about that from a slightly perhaps different point of view, and maybe that's his whole juice of like getting me to talk about it, because I think that again, as soon as you start on this path, you have frequent ultra-terrestrial contact, frequent all the time, every day, every night,